When the Ukrainians found themselves under assault from the Russians starting on February 22nd, the general belief in Ukraine, in Europe, in the United States, here, was that this was going to be a relatively quick war. Sure, the Ukrainians had proven that they actually have a national identity now, and they didn't 10 years ago. And so there were debates about whether this war is over in a month or 3 months or 6 months. I went for 6. But there was not a lot of hope in a lot of sectors that the Ukrainians could really stand up in any meaningful way. And wow, have they outperformed. And that has encouraged different countries to draw different lessons. So you may recall on the 3rd day of the war, back in February, that the Russians had a 40-mile-long convoy of military vehicles advancing south out of Belarus, which is their patsy country, stooge, satellite, use it, whatever negative word you like is probably appropriate, towards Kiev. And 24 hours in, they stopped because they forgot to bring fuel tanks with them. And 2 days after that, a lot of the soldiers had to dismount and walk back to Belarus because they forgot food trucks as well. And in some circles, this made people really excited because it showed that the Russians didn't know how to fight a modern war. But for the Russians, this is an issue of existential conflict for them, of survival. They see that if they can't forward position troops into a series of geopolitical gateways to their west, that the next time that someone attacks them, yes, they're not expecting that right now, but Russia's been invaded 50 odd times in their history, they're pretty sure it's going to happen again at some point. They fear if they can't position their troops now that they never will. The Russian ethnicity is dying out just like a lot of others around the world, and they're geographically vulnerable. So they saw this as their last chance. And if they can't fight a real war by Western standards, that's a problem, because the Russians see this as an issue of survival, which means they are willing to use nukes, because they know if they don't, and they fail in the conventional war, then Russia ceases to exist in about 20 years. It's a reasonable fear. I think it's accurate. But other countries so from the Western point of view, that means we have to provide the Ukrainians with better weapon systems they can use with a minimal of training without American forces being required there for the logistics. That way the war stays bottled up in Ukraine and we don't get a direct West-NATO confrontation that the Russians know that they would lose, that the West knows the Russians would lose, and that would induce them to consider nukes. We can't allow that to happen. Keep the war in Ukraine. The Russians drew their own conclusions. Theirs was that they had been drinking their own Kool-Aid a little bit too much, and the Ukrainians were never going to welcome them in as liberators. And so the solution was to simply destroy them as a people. So the Russians have gone back to their pre-World War I playbook and advancing slowly under mass dumb artillery and specifically targeting not just anything that moves, but anything that doesn't move, any sort of civilian infrastructure, especially if it's agricultural in nature. And so we have now seen that around Kharkiv, and we've seen that in Mariupol, and we've seen that on the outsides of Mykolaiv, and of course throughout Luhansk and Donetsk provinces. The Russians are just physically obliterating everything they come across, because that turns the Ukrainian population into, puts them into two groups. Group one are refugees, you never have to worry about them again. And the second one you can treat as subhuman and either shoot them, sell them into slavery, kidnap the kids, send them off to Siberia to become Russian or whatever else that destroys the existence of either the Ukrainian identity or of Ukrainians proper. At present, between the internally displaced people in Ukraine and the refugees, that's already 15 million people. That's a third of the pre-war population. Even if somehow Ukraine manages to win this war, this is still the end of Ukraine as a country within 30 years, because they literally no longer have the people. It was already bad, but now there's a demographic bomb that's been set off under them, and it's already exploded. The damage has already been done. It can only get worse. AFIA is providing medical assistance to the entirety of the Ukrainian refugee community, and recently they've even started getting some medical teams into Ukraine proper to help closer to the front. Very risky stuff, very dangerous stuff. I am not brave enough to try to help them with that. I am brave enough to try to work with my network, however, to get them assistance wherever they can. That includes you. There are 3 ways you can help. Number one, well, 4 ways to help. You can buy a book and I'll take care of the donation for you. Number two, you can go to afiafoundation.org yourself and make your own donation. Option number 3 is that AFIA has built an Amazon page. You know how we have marriage lists where you like go to a store and the bride and the groom have already been there and they've scanned everything they want. You can pick something from the list. Amazon does something like that too. And AFIA has basically built an Amazon page that lists out all the things that they have in short supply. So bandages, amputation kits, whatever it happens to be. Just keep in mind before you click add to cart that you change the number of the things you're going to buy. Because I think it's like 500 in every item and you do not want to come up with 500 amputation kits. It's not that they couldn't use them, but you might not want to pay for that many. So you just put it in your cart when you shop, move on, that it will be sent to their packaging facility in Yonkers, New York, and they will take it from there. And then fourth, and potentially most importantly here, is until the Ukraine war, AFIA was kind of flying under the radar. They did a lot of the nuts and bolts that allowed people to survive, but it wasn't really glamorous work. I mean, they are basically taking used medical equipment or medical equipment that hasn't been used but has expired, and so hospitals have to get rid of it. AFIA takes it and then transports it to where it needs to go. So they're kind of the nuts and bolts of the humanitarian community in a number of countries, Ukraine simply being the one where they're doing the most work at the moment. That's great, but it does mean they need some help because they have to get that equipment first. So if you are affiliated with a hospital or know someone it is, we have attached a flyer after this message where you can basically give it to the person in question who's in the logistics or the supply chain system of the hospital, and anything that they have that is surplus that would have to be destroyed, all they have to do is at a lower cost ship it to New York, and then AFIA will do the expensive, difficult part of getting it to Europe and then getting it into the hands of the people who need it either on the borders of Ukraine or in Ukraine proper. So they just need help with that first part, getting the equipment that was going to be disposed of anyway. All right, that's everything from me. We're going to continue on with newsletters as proves relevant. For those of you who are new, this newsletter is free. It will always be free. I try to put out as often as I can, especially based on the news of the day. Since COVID has kind of wound down a little bit in the United States and the Ukraine is war, that has been a lot more often than normal. Sometimes I'm having 5 and 6 a week. It's usually not that fast. I'll never ask you for money, but I will ask you to support groups like Feed in America during the COVID pandemic and AFIA Foundation during the Ukraine war. We try to pick a charity that has found a lever and just needs a little bit of help to do an outsized amount of good. Okay, that's everything from me. Until next time.